Hello and welcome to virtual open house. My name is Mr. Wible, and this year I will be your student's accelerated social studies teacher. So I wanted to at least show my face and say hello so you could put a face to the name. Just like everything this year, this open house is a little bit odd, a little bit different, doing it virtually this way. But I do want to take a few minutes to give you a sense of what you and your student can expect this year in social studies. I should also let you know that besides being your son or daughter's social studies teacher, I'm also one of the freshman class advisors. I share that job with Mr. Del Sandro. He's the other freshman class advisor. And just because of that, it means that I'm just a little bit more in tune to what's going on with the freshman class. I'm another resource that the freshmen can have if there's something that they need, if they have questions. So besides seeing your student in class and being their teacher, they can know that Mr. Wible is also here in that capacity as well as the class advisor for them this year. So as I said, everything is a little bit unusual this year, including this video for open house. Normally I would get to see you guys in person. You'd get to see me. We'd at least be able to say hello that way, but we're gonna make it work here with this video. And so because we're not really sure how this year is going to go, and it is so unusual, what I've decided to do for open house under these circumstances is basically just give you the rundown of what freshman accelerated US 1 would look like under normal circumstances. And because of that, my goal, even though these are not normal circumstances, my goal is to provide my students with as close to the same type of experience that they would get if it was just a normal year. And so with that, I'm going to give you a rundown of what they can expect and what you can expect in social studies this year. So here we go. Under normal circumstances at open house, when we would get to see each other, it's always this really limited amount of time that we get to spend with each of our groups of parents, and so I've had to streamline it over the years. And what I've decided to do is to focus in on two things for you guys to have a sense of what this class will be like for your students. And that is, number one, what content do we cover? And then I like to discuss the difference between the accelerated version, which is what your students are enrolled in, versus the academic version. So let's start with the content. It's pretty simple here. I just listed all of the topics that we're going to cover this first semester. The one thing that you have to understand is that times will change with the group that I have or how a unit is going, and so sometimes I'll make decisions along the way to either cut this thing out, or I'll decide that we're really getting into this, so we're going to spend more time on it, but that means then I can eliminate some of these other things that might not be as significant, whatever. But ultimately, I try to cover all of this material. So where do we start? So the first thing that your students will be getting is some stuff about the era of reform. We're talking early 1800s, reform movements like the movement to start public education, the early women's rights movement, the movement to abolish slavery, and on and on and on and on. Once we get through those early reform movements, we will talk a little bit about expansion westward. Now this is in the early to mid 1800s, so we're talking mostly the geographic expansion. So we're talking about acquiring new lands west, like the Texas territory, eventually California, Oregon, war with Mexico. Once we cover the westward expansion period, we get into what ends up being the kind of the thread of the whole ninth grade year, and that is the Civil War era. So we'll do the pre-war decade. We'll spend a whole unit on the 1850s, the lead up to the Civil War and what was going on in our country, so that students have an understanding of how and why this came to be. And then we get into the Civil War. I love the Civil War. We spend a lot of time on it. The kids like it, so hopefully we have a good experience with that. Once we finish the war, we get into a real rough patch of American history, those years after the war, the Reconstruction period. The next big topic that we hit is the post-Civil War, late 1800s, growth of big business and industry in our country. That's a fun one too. There's a lot of local history there. We'll get into the oil industry, things about Drake's Well and Rockefeller in this area. We'll get into the growth of the steel industry and Carnegie and Pittsburgh. So the kids get into that as well. Once we hit the growth of industry and big business, we then go out west again. This time we talk a little bit more about the human experience and less about the geography. So we're going to be talking about the development of the West and the settling of the West. We're going to talk about Native Americans. We're going to talk about settlers. We're going to talk about the growth of farming, mining, ranching, and that kind of stuff. The next big topic is the era of imperialism. So by the time we settle the West, we are now at the late 18 and early 1900s. And at this point, America was becoming more of a global power. And so we talk about the imperialism that kind of grew out of that era. With that comes a unit on immigration. Now, the thing about immigration, sometimes I don't even cover that entire unit because there's a thread of immigration to this country throughout a lot of these other chapters. And so we hit on immigration quite a bit. And finally, the wrap up, the last thing we do absolutely is World War I. The kids seem to love that as well, and I really enjoy hitting World War I. They get excited. And the reason we finish with that, and we absolutely have to cover that, is because next year in US 2 in 10th grade, that's where they start. They will begin in the post-World War I 1920s. And so that's where I lead them. So there's the content. The other thing, as I said, that I like to cover is the difference between the accelerated version versus the academic version. Your kids are enrolled in the accelerated version of this course. The content that I just went over is essentially the same as it is in the academic class. We don't change much on the content. We cover the same time period. We even use the same books on some level. However, what we do is that we get, in the accelerated version, we get a lot more in depth into the content. We will go deeper into some of these issues. We'll spend more time on certain things. For example, one of the threads of the 9th grade year is that whole Civil War era and the slavery situation and the abolition movement and a lot of racial issues and the things that happened in our country after the Civil War ended and the tension that was established with the abolition of slavery. And so there's a lot of potentially pretty deep conversations and sensitive issues that we can talk about. And so in the accelerated version, we will get more into that. Another big difference is that in the accelerated class, there's a much heavier writing component. Your students will be writing in my class. But the good news is that we don't just expect them to be able to write and just throw them into the fire to do that. One of the things that I will work in with my content lessons are mini writing lessons. And so we're just building off of the skills that they're learning in their language arts classes. We're continuing to make them practice those skills, and so they will be writing more in my class than they would if they were in the academic level. And then finally, the last bullet I have there is just expectations. As you might expect, in an accelerated class, the expectation is higher. We're going to cover more. They're going to be expected to meet deadlines. For lack of a better way to describe it, it's high school now, and I'm not going to hold their hands and help them along through this class. Now, I am going to be here helping them along through, but it's going to be a little bit more on them to do what they have to do. And I think that that's something that you all want to have those expectations on your student, and that's why you have them enrolled in the accelerated level. So there's a little bit about the difference between the two. Other than that, I just wanted to, say a few things about this year. I know it's unusual, it's going to be different, but I'm going to tackle it in a way that tries to give the kids the best experience possible. I'm excited about it. I can't wait to see your kids. In fact, being the 9th grade class advisor, I've already done freshman orientation, and I got to see and meet some kids there, and it was really exciting for me. So I'm very excited. I hope that you are, and I hope that your students are as well. All that being said, no matter what happens throughout the course of this year, if ever you need to ask me a question, if you need to get in touch with me about anything at all dealing with our class or your son or daughter, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And here's the two ways that you can do that. Number one is there's the phone number for the main office at the high school. If you call them, they can put it through to me. If I'm not teaching, I'll be able to pick up the phone. If I am, it'll go to voicemail, and I'll get that eventually and get back to you. The other way, and probably the more efficient way, is to just shoot me an email. There's my General McLean email, kevinwible@generalmclean.org. The nice thing about the email is I check it periodically throughout the day, even more than I would check my voicemail on my phone. And when I see an email, if it's something that I can quickly respond to, it can almost give you an immediate response. Now, sometimes that's not possible, but I try to get back to you as quickly as I can. So there you go. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And with that, again, I'd just like to reiterate how excited I am to meet your kids. And hopefully I'll meet you guys somewhere along the way in person as this year unfolds. All right, you guys have a great day, and let's go out there and have a great year.